Hello and welcome to Political Brew. I'm Phil Hirschkorn. Today's topics: the new U.S. Senate race, Troy Jackson versus Susan Collins; the Maine governor's race, Hannah Pingree, Bobby Charles, and Rick Bennett. What issues will and should dominate? The second congressional district race, Democrat Matt Dunlap versus Republican Paula Page. And before we go on hiatus, the year in review featuring Graham Platner. Today, I'm joined by Lisa Keim, a Republican former state Senate assistant minority leader and current Oxford County commissioner, and BJ behind Jackson McCollister, Troy's former Senate chief of staff, a member of Maine's Democratic State Committee, and a Maine delegate to the Democratic National Committee. Thank you both for being here, our last show of the summer.
Good morning.
It's been 1 week since Troy Jackson officially replaced Graham Platner as the Maine Democratic Party U.S. Senate nominee. After a near sweep of delegate slates at 16 county caucus meetings, Jackson won near unanimous approval on the first convention ballot in Bangor. It helped that every other competitor, except one relatively unknown candidate named Sandra Pelletier, had dropped out. In his 20-minute nomination acceptance speech, Jackson said something Collins would agree with. They're both from Aroostook County, but that's where the similarities end. And I spoke to Collins in Casco right after. Take a listen.
I've always known, I know now, I'll know tomorrow exactly who I work for. After 30 years in Washington, she definitely seems that she's forgotten. For 30 years, she's told us that she's concerned. But look, concern is not courage. And what she says in Maine does not erase what she does down in Washington.
I never take any election for granted. No one will outwork me, and I will be working each and every day to highlight my accomplishments, including bringing $1.5 billion to the state of Maine for 674 projects all across the state.
Within 48 hours of securing the nomination, Jackson raised $2 million, his campaign said. A good start, but a lot of catching up to do. As of June 30th, Collins's individual and joint campaign committee said $13 million cash on hand, not to mention tens of millions of dollars in super PAC backing. BJ, how does your candidate, Troy Jackson, catch up and mount a competitive campaign?
I mean, what we saw on Saturday at that convention was some of the most energized base voters I've ever seen before, and I've attended many conventions. And it's clear that Jackson has this grassroots enthusiasm, and I think what you'll find is most of that money that he's raised is coming from small dollar donors, whereas on the other side of this, we see that Susan Collins is backed by super PACs. Just today, we heard Elon Musk is planning on backing her with some massive ad spending, and so it's really going to be a tale of two fundraising records. And, you know, I don't think that Jackson necessarily ever catches up with Collins on the fundraising perspective, but I don't think he has to. He has a very compelling story to tell Mainers and just needs the resources to get it in front of people.
What's the Republican view, Lisa?
Well, I think we start with really the process of how Jackson got there. I think there's a lot of Mainers still smarting with, especially Democrats, but really Mainers in general. The process was, yes, maybe there was a convention where everyone looked really excited, but it was a room packed full of insiders that the Democrat Party put together, and then Troy Jackson had political insiders make sure he won that nomination. That is sitting really unwell with Maine people because they're supposed to be the party of democracy, and yet it was not a fair and open process that brought him there.
But sorry to interrupt, didn't 17 or 19,000 people participate in the meetings and vote and run for delegate slots?
Yes, but then it was insiders that sort of made sure that those delegates were all for Troy Jackson. I mean, what he's doing is running as some sort of outsider, trying to be sort of the coattails of Graham Platner. But the thing is that every single issue that Graham Platner ran on are the issues that Troy Jackson needs to run away from. He was in leadership. The fact that, you know, housing isn't affordable in Maine, the fact that we don't have access to health care, the fact that Maine's economy is awful, which he said on, you know, an interview on Morning Joe. He said, you know, Maine's economy is awful. He needs to look in the mirror. There are lots of states, you know, we're a nation of many states. They're not all having awful economies because somehow Washington, D.C. states have the control of their own economy. His past record is going to come back to bite him. And, you know, the person himself, you know, there's going to be more things come out about this, I'm sure, as, you know, the campaign goes along. But Troy Jackson is hyper partisan and also, you know, a bully when he's not getting his own way. And so some of those things, when we are at a time where we need our leaders to be able to work across the aisle, what we have in Jackson now, if we were to even think of replacing Susan Collins, who has proven again and again to work across the aisle and do her job well, replaced with Jackson, who generally loses his cool when things aren't going his way.
You saw that in personal experience in the room
definitely
in
did.
Augusta?
I have some stories to share, you know, absolutely, that just show what type of leader he is when he feels like things are not going his way.
BJ, does Troy Jackson have the temperament to be a U.S. Senator?
I think where we are right now in this country, Mainers are looking for someone who's going to go to Washington, D.C. and really fight for them. And when we talk about someone who's going to put working families first, that is Troy Jackson through and through. You know, thanks to Troy Jackson, every kid has access to universal school meals so they don't have to learn on an empty stomach. Thanks to Troy Jackson, we've had expanded, school funding. We've had expanded property tax relief for folks. Thanks to Troy Jackson, we've got different protections for workers that are in place. Where people are hurting right now are in their checkbooks and in the economy. And primarily, if we think about the #1 driver there, it has to do with the price of gas right now. And Susan Collins has to answer for that. That's not a state policy.
The Iran war?
That is a product of the Iran war. And right now...
Which she's voted against to end 5 times.
But we're still here in this situation where she's not holding the Trump administration accountable. She says she will, but then votes with the Trump administration 96% of the time.
Well, that was just last year.
Just last year, and in the last year,
the average is lower in the first term, around 78%.
I think we've seen the economy just absolutely work against people more and more in the last year.
Yes, I agree. In Maine economy, I have to push back on Troy Jackson's always saying that he's for the working people. The working people, we have the highest rate of taxes of any state in the nation here in Maine. He has denied tax relief for tax on tips. He denied tax relief for overtime. He denied the increased pension and retirement deductions for the elderly. He denied the increased standard deductions. And he denied business exemptions that would have helped like small businesses and private single self-employed businesses. He also says he's for the working Mainer, but he is bilking systems the working Mainers are paying into by like his exorbitant legislative reimbursements. Working Mainers pay taxes towards that money. It's the honor system. I was in leadership. I know what it's like. You get to fill out your card however you want to. I was in Augusta. This is how many hours I drove. This is how many miles I drove. You know, he's telling that he needs reimbursement for driving back and forth from Allagash while he's also got an apartment a house in Augusta that he says, you know, that's his primary residence. So He's bilking the workers, the taxpayers, you know, nickeling and diming these like lies. That's not being for the working Mainer. They need tax relief.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break. It sounds like you're saying that he's going to be subjected to the same kind of scrutiny that Graham Platner was. We'll see in the weeks ahead. When we come back, the Maine governor's race and the different issues 3 candidates are discussing. Turning to the Maine governor's race, Democrat Hannah Pingree is addressing the rural hospital crisis, calling on Maine Health, the state's largest employer and hospital chain, to keep the labor and delivery services open at Lincoln Hospital's Biles campus in Damariscotta, and calling for a statewide moratorium on maternity unit closures until the next governor takes office. 12 Maine hospitals have closed their units in the last decade, 5 in the past 2 years.
This isn't just a healthcare crisis, safety crisis. This is an economic crisis for our state. The health crisis doesn't stay contained to the families alone who lost these services. When a woman in labor needs an ambulance for a 2-hour round trip to the nearest hospital, that ambulance and crew are gone for hours. They are not available for the next heart attack, the next car accident, or the next emergency here.
Republican gubernatorial candidate Bobby Charles has begun visiting drug addiction and treatment centers around the state. When we met up with him after his Portland clinic visits, he said the state needs a better crisis response.
We are losing people every day, and we're losing them not just to addiction, but to all of the street problems that they can encounter. And so I've spent just yesterday, today, the day before yesterday, spent time with the homeless in Augusta, here in Portland. And I just want to tell you, we can do better, okay? My conviction is that we not only can do better, we must do better. These people need us.
Charles also criticized Pingree for overdose deaths during the Mills administration, peaking at 723 in 2022. His graph there showed the start of a decline, but not the full 4-year, 46% reduction in drug deaths to 390 last year. Campaigning in Lincoln County, independent gubernatorial candidate Rick Bennett discussed his view of the political moment and touted the group of current and former Democratic legislators who've endorsed him over Pingree, such as Representative Lydia Crafts.
People are ready for a different kind of leadership, an independent, nonpartisan approach, working across the aisles to solve our problems.
What I'm hoping for is an independent governor who can really bring together both ends of the political spectrum to get work done that doesn't put us in an all or nothing, a flip-flop, a back and forth kind of pendulum swing.
Well, Lisa, you served with Rick Bennett when he was a Republican, and Bobby Charles is your party's nominee. Sounding sort of a softer side there. What are your impressions of where we are in the governor's race?
Yeah, I think things are moving along the patterns that we would expect them. And I would say with Bobby Charles, he's rounding out, and no one is ever like defined by one moment or one issue. And so he's, addressing the full scope of need, I would say, in the state of Maine. And we do have a crisis with homelessness, and people do need help, and we can do better. Hannah's out there saying, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. It's ignoring the fact that she's been in charge for 9 years. And as running the Office of Policy, Innovation, and the Future, she literally could have already done a stakeholder group to look at why maternity centers are closing. And there's so much on the economy and on healthcare work that she should have already been doing. And Bobby Charles isn't wrong. She also should have been convening groups and figuring out more solutions to the opioid crisis. So here she is saying, well, elect me because I'm going to change things, when she's ignoring she's been there for 9 years with legislative mandate to actually ability to go ahead and create policy solutions that she's not been able to do.
BJ?
I think when you look at the fact that Hannah Pingree is talking about health care, it strikes the climate that we're in on a national scale, which is that the big, beautiful bill has made it so that hospitals and healthcare centers across the state and country are really struggling because of some of the healthcare cuts that were included within that bill that Susan Collins ultimately helped advance. When you look at what Bobby Charles is doing now, Bobby Charles is talking with a softer tone right now when there's a TV camera in front of him. But if you look online, the AI-generated ads that he's running are just vicious, and not talking about this crisis in such a soft tone that he's doing when he's talking to the media. I mean, when you think about the two of them and how you compare them, I think Hannah actually did do quite a bit in her role to make sure that she was reducing opioid overdoses. She did do quite a bit to make sure she was addressing the affordable housing crisis. And all of these things take time, energy, and resources from the state. And I'll remind you, Bobby Charles campaigned on the fact that he was going to completely eliminate the income tax, which means that there won't be a support system existing from the state to do the things he says he wants to do.
So, BJ mentioned something that really Democrats keep saying again and again, and they point to the big, beautiful bill and they say, oh, well, hospitals are being hurt because of Medicaid cuts. Those cuts haven't even come into effect yet. So whatever's happening right now has nothing to do with that, though that is still future. And some of the things that are happening that are coming with that are changes that need to happen. None of us can just close our eyes and think there's enough money to keep on going the way we're going with Medicaid forever. We have to have work requirements. We need to restructure. We have to take care of the people that are on it and counting on it right now, but towards the future, we've got to make changes. That's just common sense. I think that people of Maine can see that, but what's happening right now, that's fully on the backs of the Democrats and how they have run the Augusta and the state of Maine. There are people that don't want to be like a millionaire tax. Those are our physicians. Why would we be pushing the people away that we need so desperately to give us access to health care here in the state of Maine? And, the idea that we need more government programs to give us housing, we don't. We need the government to get off the backs of the people that are out there and can create housing that we need. Those are there's fundamental flaws in the way the government has been run for the past decade. Hannah can't now come in and say, well, I did something. Well, are you better off now than you were 9 years ago? That's what you can ask Hannah Pingree.
Or 8 or 7 years ago when Mills took over, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. BJ, your final thought on this?
You know, when we take a step back and we look at the fact, Lisa's right, there are more cuts that are going to impact hospitals. But right now, this is something that's happening because people don't have access to health care because of rollbacks and the Obamacare premiums. And I agree with Lisa, we need to make sure we cut barriers for building more housing. Republicans in Augusta have also opposed that. So you can't have it both ways.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, talking Medicaid some more in the race for the 2nd Congressional District U.S. House seat. In the U.S. House race in Maine's northern 2nd Congressional District, the seat being vacated by Jared Golden, Democratic nominee Matt Dunlap marked this week's 61st anniversary of President Lyndon Johnson signing the Medicare and Medicaid programs into law by criticizing his opponent, Republican Paul LePage. Dunlap said LePage, as governor, blocked Medicaid expansion in Maine 5 times, and last year supported President Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which had cuts in Medicaid services that are relied upon by almost a third of Mainers, 400,000 people.
He mentioned that the big, beautiful bill was the greatest thing in the world for people in Maine, and I just don't see it. I don't see how taking things away, resources away from our working families, does anything but drive them further into doubt and uncertainty. And I think that we can do better.
LePage's campaign responded by telling us Mainers all know Paul LePage paid off a massive hospital debt as governor, which was threatening health care in Maine. Paul LePage literally saved hospital services and health care for Mainers. Matt Dunlap has done nothing. Paul LePage has gone on record repeatedly with concerns that the government-run health care programs will not properly reimburse health care facilities for their real costs, and the chickens have come home to roost with hospital service impacts. Well, it sounds a lot like what Lisa was saying in the last block when we were discussing what the governor's approach is. BJ, what do you think about this as an issue in that race?
I think it's a core issue for all races right now. And I think, you know, as you mentioned, about a third of Mainers rely on these programs. And you can't just say they don't work and walk away from them. The goal is to fix them as much as possible, but also to bolster them. And so, you know, what I'm seeing is a group of people around Matt Dunlap who are excited about his plans to expand programs like this, and a statement written from a LePage advisor in response. I don't know where Paul LePage is right now, but he's not having a room full of supporters the way Matt Dunlap is, and I think that indicates how his campaign's going.
And Dunlap's for Medicare for all. Lisa, I don't think that's something Republicans are for at all.
Well,
the
definitely
opposite.
not. I mean, I think when we talk about Medicare for all, it's like, don't let the facts get in the way of your talking points, right? Because when you look at the facts, I mean, we had Derigo Health here in the state of Maine. It's a textbook case of government-run healthcare, which made big promises, underdelivered, essentially folded. Yes, we weren't reimbursing hospitals properly. When we did Maine Care expansion, also the facts show that it took people off private healthcare insurance and put them on the public dime, and it didn't actually increase nearly as what we expected it to. Just the overall insured population, right? It just shifted the burden of cost to the public. That doesn't work. And when we look at nationalized healthcare, we can just look at Canada. People from Canada come into the States to get health care. Why? Because they're put on waiting lists. They don't have access. We do need solutions. We absolutely do. Health care is a mess in our state and in our nation. And we do have solutions, but they're more market-based. It isn't, I'm from the government and I'm going to come fix this, because we have fact after fact after fact. We have proof that shows the government can't come in and run this better. We have to find other solutions.
And are the Maine Care state reimbursement rates too low for hospitals?
If you ask hospitals, they've been saying that for a very long time. And that is something that Republicans in the past have said, we need to increase the reimbursement rate to hospitals.
Let's take the broader view of the CD2 race. What other issues can and should be are being talked about that will matter?
I mean, I think just like everywhere, affordability is going to be a core of everything. And what's a challenge for Susan Collins, what's a challenge for Paul LePage, what's a challenge for Bobby Charles is, the highest elected official in the land, Donald Trump, says the affordability crisis is a hoax and doesn't even believe that the increased cost of groceries really impact people. And when you have to run alongside the person that's got the biggest megaphone in your party saying that affordability doesn't matter, that's a real challenge for anybody who's running as a Republican.
Elisa, do you think the Trump factor will drag down Paula Page in CD2 or even Susan Collins
Trump
statewide?
will absolutely be a factor, and I agree that he needs to be talking more about affordability and have a greater focus on affordability because Mainers are hurting. I do think, however, that his focus, even though he hasn't maybe been as vocal about it as he needs to be, is he wants to grow the economy. And it's like, you know, the tide that lifts all boats. If there is more money flowing in our economy, our real estate taxes go down, the incomes of regular Mainers goes up. And so you do have to look at how do we grow the pie, not just, you know, sliver out more and more pieces of it.
Okay, we're going to take one more break, and when we come back, a look back at what was the phenomenon of Graham Platner. When we look back on campaign 2026 in Maine, I predict the dominant storyline will be Graham Platner's rise and fall. This may have been the high point of the Platner campaign in February. Platner crowd surfing onto the stage at Portland State Theater and singing with his favorite punk rock band, the Dropkick Murphys, their tune, Bury the Bones. Graham's excellent adventure started with a social media video announcing his campaign last August.
We have watched this state become essentially unlivable for working class people, and it makes me deeply angry.
National profiles of the oysterman and combat veteran quickly followed. I learned about Platner from the New York Times.
I am running because it is time for change.
And I checked out his first speech on Labor Day, his 41st birthday. He had 6,000 partisans on their feet.
We will win the primary. We will win the general. And we will show this whole country the way forward. Because as goes Maine, as goes the nation.
Flanked by rally host and endorser Bernie Sanders, and then gubernatorial candidate Troy Jackson, their fates intertwined.
And I will stand in the way of every fascist attack on our democracy.
Platner drew huge crowds to dozens of town halls, combining a critique of economic inequality with demands for political reform.
Power is for those who are willing to organize and to take it.
After a cache of his years-old offensive Reddit post surfaced, and after he revealed his skull and crossbones tattoo resembling Nazi imagery,
And the idea that I've been going around with something like that utterly horrifies me. For that reason, I have gone and gotten it covered up.
Platner and his supporters persevered.
I have to remind myself that I have no right to quit.
His momentum blocked 78-year-old Governor Janet Mills from gaining traction.
Age is a consideration. I'm not stupid. I know that age is a consideration, and consideration for me.
She quit the campaign 40 days before the Democratic primary.
Together, we will win back this Senate seat.
Platner easily won, overcoming national newspaper stories about an active dating app profile, sexting women who weren't his wife, and having allegedly physically mistreated ex-girlfriends. One split-screen moment in June epitomized his challenge facing the 30-year incumbent Republican, Susan Collins casting her 10,000th consecutive Senate floor vote, while Platner was answering questions about being a bad boyfriend.
It's simply not true. Anything alleging physicality.
His subsequent endorsement by Planned Parenthood had a cringeworthy moment.
I myself, at a younger age, received I got STI checks.
Collins diverted from her mantra of steering federal funds to Maine to comment on Platner's character. Can you be more specific? What did you mean by his egregious conduct?
Well, there have been many examples of his treatment of women. For example, his blaming online, his blaming rape victims and saying that they should take personal responsibility.
And finally, a more serious, credible accusation, unproven but unforgivable.
Here's a man who was drunk and who, by dictionary definition, raped me.
Any accusation of non-consensual behavior is categorically false.
But then it was over.
We believe that for the movement to continue, can't be made.
Collins faced her own hurdles, recurring questions about her 2018 decision to confirm Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh.
I believe that I cast the right vote.
The double-edged sword that is Republican Party leader Donald Trump.
Susan Collins, hi Susan, I heard you're doing good.
And questions about her health at age 73.
What I have is an extremely common condition that is called a benign essential tremor.
Perhaps diffusing that issue with her streak.
I have never missed a single vote.
And moving briskly in her Made in Skowhegan New Balance sneakers through summer parades. That piece edited by photojournalist Scout Fishman. Lisa, what are your reflections on that roller coaster ride?
Wow, that was an incredible clip and just review of Platner's rise and fall. I think as I was reflecting on this, what strikes me is that there were Democrat socialists, operatives that found Platner because they were looking for an image. They wanted a certain image to portray to the people of Maine so they could take out Susan Collins. And they found the image they wanted, and they ignored the stuff as long as they could that was underneath. But just the falsity of what was being sold to the Maine people compared to the genuineness of Susan Collins, and who has been there, cast her 10,000th vote, and just has worked, right, and worked and worked. And yet we were able to fall for that because it was a mirage. Everything we were given was a mirage. And I still wonder, why did the party establishment finally pull? Was it because it seems like it only happened after polls showed that Graham was going to lose. And it's exactly what happened to Biden, right? There came a moment where they're like, yes, they've been propping him up. Everyone knew that he had problems. Biden was mentally incapable of being president. It was ignored until they realized he's not going to beat Trump because the polls are showing it. This is what happened with Platner. Ignored all of the mounting evidence, egregious stuff. I will say, I asked ChatGPT to give me just a quick overview of the most egregious things that Platner had said and done, and it wouldn't answer because it was against their content standards. So there we have it, and yet, we have this man that just kind of made it through, and then all of a sudden, polls show him losing, and he gets pulled.
Well, BJ, let's give you the last word. I mean, there was definitely a bromance between your candidate now, Troy Jackson, and Graham. What are your thoughts about what we went through?
Well, I think that the relation between Troy Jackson and Graham Platner is just because Troy Jackson has been fighting for the progressive issues that Graham Platner was talking about well before Graham Platner was back from bartending in Washington, D.C. I think if it goes on the proverbial, I didn't have it on my bingo card, I didn't expect he was going to beat Susan Collins, didn't expect the tattoo, didn't expect the Reddit post, didn't expect the New York Times story, and certainly did not expect the end. So I think that's bingo, and I think we just are very lucky to have this behind us.
Okay, well, that's all for this edition of Political Brew. We're going to be on hiatus in August, back with a really big show, September 4th. Thanks to our analysts, Lisa Keim and BJ McCollister, for joining me, and thank you for watching.